So today we are making what I think is one of the most underrated carnivore staples. Bone broth. Now, this is actually happening because after my soup video, a lot of you asked for the recipe in the comments. And honestly, when I casually said, yeah, I can share how I make broth, I did not expect that many of you to actually make me up on it. That's when I knew I was in trouble. Because now I can't just wing it. I have to actually measure things, remember timings, and pretend I know what I'm doing. So here we are, making a full batch of rich, collagen-packed broth using just beef bones and oxtail. Carnivore friendly, no veggies, no funny business, just the good stuff. This recipe doesn't just give you broth, it also gives you pure tallow for cooking, which is basically free steak fuel. I'll show you exactly how to get broth, and along the way I'll share all the little tips that make that savory liquid gold you want in your freezer. So let's start with what I'm using today. First, I have got 1 kilo of beef bones. I ordered these online. They came frozen, and I let them defrost in the fridge overnight before giving them a quick wash. And you know how sometimes you order bones and expect just, well, bones? Yeah, a few of these arrived with some serious chunks of meat still attached, which is great if you are making a meaty stew. But for broth, it's kind of like when you order black coffee and they hand you a latte. Not exactly what you picture, but we'll make it work. Then we have got 500 grams of oxtail, also frozen and defrosted. Oxtail is one of my favorite things to throw in a broth, because it's got this perfect mix of collagen, fat, and flavor that makes the finished broth rich without even trying. Now, I'm not adding salt while making the broth. I always season my broth later, when I'm actually using it. Because here's the thing, you don't know yet if you're turning this into a soup, a sauce, or just sipping it straight. Salt too early and you might end up with a broth that's too salty after reducing. And there's no fixing that except by adding more water, which defeats the whole point. So first, I'm loading the beef bones into my air fryer tray. I'm trying to get them in a single layer so they brown evenly, but of course, they never actually fit perfectly. One big piece didn't make it in, and that's fine. This isn't like baking where everything has to be exact. The reason I roast the bones first is simple. It gives the broth a deeper, richer flavor and a darker color. It's basically your free upgrade from good broth to wow, that smells amazing broth. Now, the oxtail. I leave that raw. It's already packed with flavor and fat. And honestly, roasting it just makes more mess in the air fryer for no real benefit. Straight into the pot later works perfectly. Once I have got as many bones as will fit, I roast them at 200 degrees Celsius for about 16 minutes, flipping them halfway through. If you are using a regular oven, same temperature, but give it closer to 25-30 minutes. And if you skip roasting completely, your broth will still work, but it is going to be lighter and less rich. I'm not saying that the broth police will show up, but they might send you a warning. Once the roasted bones are ready, I grab the biggest pot I own, and being an owner of 2 pots, I mean the biggest. Broth takes up more space than you think, especially once you add the oxtail. I arrange the bones in the bottom as evenly as I can, which sounds nice, but in reality is just a game of bone Tetris. Some are massive, some are small, and you just kind of hope they all find their place. Then I cover everything with cold water. Here in the Netherlands, I just use cold tap water straight from the sink. But if your tap water tastes like a swimming pool or, you know, mystery minerals, run it through a filter first. Whatever water you use, that's what your broth is going to taste like. And yes, cold is important. Starting with cold water helps slowly pull out the collagen, minerals, and flavor from the bones and meat. If you dump them straight into hot water, you seal the outside too fast and you don't get that same deep extraction. I fill it just high enough to cover the bones, but I leave a few centimeters at the top of the pot. That gives the broth room to bubble without boiling over. And it also leaves space in case I need to top off with more hot water later. And trust me, at some point you will. With the bones and oxtail in, I set my induction stove to 6 and let the water come up to a gentle boil. And I know it's tempting to just crank the heat to max so it boils faster. But slow heating is better. It gives all that collagen and marrow time to start working their way into the water without shaking things up too much, which helps keep the broth clear. Once it hits that first boil, I immediately turn the heat down and grab a spoon to start skimming the foam off the top. That foam is just proteins rising to the surface, and while it's harmless, it can make your broth cloudy and give it a slightly bitter taste. I like my broth clear enough to see through, especially if I'm sipping it straight, so I take my time here. I skim for a good while, not just one quick pass. I'll check every few minutes for the first 40 minutes or so, because more foam always sneaks up on you. During this stage, I'm also watching the bubbles. I want lazy little pops on the surface, not a wild rolling boil. On my induction, that usually means bouncing between settings 2 and 3 every half an hour or so. Too hot, and your broth turns cloudy. Too cold, and it's not really cooking, so you have to babysit it at first until it settles. Once the foam stage is done, we move into the easy part, the long simmer. I keep my induction mostly on 2 or 3, adjusting every 30 minutes, depending on how active the bubbles are. What I am looking for is that gentle, lazy bubbling, just enough to keep things moving, but not so much that the broth looks like it's training for a whitewater rafting event or something. I let mine go for about 6 hours. You can absolutely go longer. Some people simmer their broth for 12, even 24 hours. The longer you go, the more collagen you pull out, and the richer the broth gets. But honestly, past a certain point, you're mostly just reducing water. 6 hours gives me a nice balance between depth of flavor and, well, having a life outside of watching a pot. Now, because this is a carnivore broth, I'm obviously not adding any vegetables. No carrots, no onions, no celery. I know some people swear by that for flavor, but we are keeping it pure. Because at the end of the day, if you want carrot water, you can just go boil a carrot. I noticed one of my bigger bones starting to peek out of the water, so I topped up with a bit of boiling water to keep everything submerged. That's important. Any bone sticking out isn't doing much for you. If you want to really supercharge the collagen, you could also throw in extra marrow bones or knuckle bones. Totally optional, but it makes for an even thicker, jelly-like broth once it's chilled. There are more great things you can add to your broth. One of my subscribers, I won't call you out this time, because I don't know if you want that, but one of my subscribers was nice enough to share some extra resources that I have linked in the description. These are made by none other than Anita from the channel Ketogenic Woman that you should definitely check out if you haven't already. Once the simmer is done, it's time to strain and store. First, I start scooping out the bones and oxtail with the big soup spoon. Yeah, not the most efficient tool for the job, but once you commit, you commit. It took a little longer, but I got there. The upside is, the kitchen smells incredible the whole time. The oxtail meat at this stage is ridiculously tender, so I set that aside to scrape off later. That's perfect for a quick carnivore soup. Just meat, broth, maybe an egg yolk whisked in, done. With the big pieces out, I strain the broth itself. I pour it through a strainer into a smaller pot, a glass tray, and lastly, attempt to do it in a jar, purely for content. I was expecting to spill some, which would give both you and me a small heart attack, but hey, I surprised even myself today. I do this partly because I have a weird mix of containers, and partly because I like to see that deep golden color through the glass. Some people like to freeze the bones and do a second round of broth. You can do that, and you will still get some flavor, but just know that the second batch will be lighter and less rich. I personally prefer to get all the goodness in one go. Once everything is strained, I let the broth cool for about 2 hours before it even goes near the fridge. There's a good reason for that. First, food safety. You don't want to trap a bunch of steam inside a sealed container, because that's basically creating a little warm, moist playground for bacteria. Second, if you shove a big pot of steaming hot broth in the fridge, you'll get so much condensation, it's like you've set off a tiny indoor rainstorm. And that just waters down your broth and makes your fridge work overtime. After it's cooled to just warm, I pop it into the fridge overnight. This is the magic step. By morning, the tallow will have risen to the top and turn into a perfect, easy to lift layer. Underneath, the broth itself should be set like a wobbly jelly, which is exactly what you want. That's all collagen, and that's how you know it's going to be good. I start by gently scraping all the tallow off. If you chilled it long enough, it should lift off cleanly. almost like taking the lid off a jar. Any little bits of broth stuck to the bottom of the fat, I just scrape off so the tallow stays pure. I store mine separately in a small tray, and it keeps for months in the fridge, even longer in the freezer. And honestly, this is like bonus currency for carnivore cooking. You can fry eggs in it, sear steaks, roast meat. It's basically free, high quality cooking fat you made without even trying. So now I have got two products from one pot. The broth and this beautiful golden tallow. Once the tallow is set aside, it is time to portion the broth for the freezer. I like to pour mine into silicone cupcake molds. They are the perfect size, and once frozen you can just pop the little pucks right out. If you got ice cube trays, those work too, but honestly, who has enough ice cube trays to hold this much broth? For soups, I also freeze a few 150 milliliter portions in Ziploc bags. That way, when I'm making a quick meal, I can just grab a bag or two and drop it straight into the pot. No defrosting a massive chunk of broth just to get a cup. That's the whole point of portioning. It makes your broth usable. Freeze it all in one giant container and you'll end up hacking at it with a knife like you're in some weird cooking themed horror movie. This way, it's neat, tidy, and ready whenever you need it. So now that you have got all this beautiful bone broth, what do you actually do with it? First, the obvious one. Sip it hot. It's warm, savory, and you can actually feel it doing good things for your joints. Second, it makes the perfect base for soups or stews. You can also reduce it down, basically simmer until it's thick, and then drizzle that over steaks or burgers for instant extra flavor. Another trick is to use broth instead of water when you're cooking meat in a pan or pressure cooker. It adds so much more depth than plain water ever could. And if you want to make it richer, you can blend it with butter or whisk in an egg yolk for a fattier, more filling drink. That's basically a carnivore latte. Let me know in the comments for your favorite uses of bone broth. So that's it, one big pot, a handful of bones, and some thyme. And now I've got a freezer full of rich bone broth and a stash of pure tallow for cooking. The process is simple. Roast your bones, cover with cold water, bring it up slowly, skim, then let it do its thing at a gentle simmer, cool it down, chill it overnight, harvest that golden fat, and portion the broth so it's always ready to go. Both the broth and the tallow are insanely versatile in carnivore cooking. If you have never tried the long simmer method before, give it a go, and definitely roast your bones first. It's such a small step, but makes all the difference in flavor. And that's all for today's batch. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a like and a comment so that more people can find this liquid gold. And I'll meet you here next time on Meet Carnivore.